This is the Free Your Life Podcast, episode number 56. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Free Heel Life Shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And it's another fabulous week, and it's Monday, which means I'm back for another episode and to talk to you guys. And I've got another amazing guest, in my opinion, and I can't wait to share it with you. But first, we have some Newsroom and Notes, everyone. This week, at the shop, we now have all of our boot and ski demos ready to roll. So we've mounted all of our skis up. We've got some Bishop skis. We've got some Volet skis. We've got various bindings for you to check out so you can get those for the holiday or anytime this week at the headquarters in Salt Lake City, Utah. And we would love for you to come by. It's a great way to try out your NTN equipment before you buy it. A lot of times people aren't really sure what they're getting into. Or maybe you're just traveling to Salt Lake and you didn't want to bring your skis, but you can just bring your boots on the plane and hop over and get a nice NTN setup. We have a new system on the website too, so you guys can scope that out. That's going to allow you to reserve stuff ahead of time and show you what's available. So we're really trying to kind of up our game there and hope that that works. So join in the fun with us. Kind of on a similar note, Free Heel Life Midwest is now open for business. You heard it. So what we've done is this is kind of our beta test. You've probably heard me talk about it if you listen to the podcast regularly. We are having a little beta test of a shop extension out in the Midwest. Keith Opperman, our good friend, is based out of Washburn, Wisconsin, way up north, and is now a advanced certified Free Heel Life ski tech and retail associate. So he's not going to be carrying any inventory there, but he can service your skis, mounts, remounts, boot molding, and some of that stuff. So also he has a full fleet of demo boots from Scarpa, skis and bindings as well. So what we're trying to do is kind of experiment with getting Free Heel Life into your area or as close as we can with someone that's certified exactly like a shop person would be in Salt Lake City so that you can go try stuff out and get the same level of service and expertise. And also, you can try stuff out locally. We're going to be announcing a couple more of these coming up, and hopefully if these go well, we can continue them on and on, which is really great because we've got a great crew in Salt Lake at the headquarters, and now with these extensions, we can serve more people with the same level of expertise and hopefully be nearby to you. So, Keith also runs his own Midwest Telefest up in the Porkies up near Lake Superior with his buddy Matt Manders. It's a wonderful event I went to last year, and Free Heel Life will be represented at the festival this year with our demos. So, get stoked, spread the word, and you can always message the shop customer service at freeheellife.com if you want to get more info and you're kind of wondering what it entails and whatnot. You will be able to actually, starting this week, select Midwest for demos, rentals, whatever you want to call them, and schedule pickups from Keith up there. So, like I said, it's a beta test. We're going to kind of work through it and help us work through the kinks so we can continue to get better. New arrivals at the headquarters this week. We have new Free Heel Life Unity Track skins in stock. So skins are in stock. A bunch of them have already gone out the door. You can find them on the website. And we know it's a backcountry year for a lot of people, so please represent. You can pick those up at the shop or online at freeheellife.com. Our buddies over at Telemark Colorado threw out a teaser last week for their upcoming 2021 King of the Hill, just kidding, King of the Heel competition. And we'll be having CJ from Telemark Colorado on next week for a quick rundown on all of that, so you can know how to participate. And it's a little video contest. It's amazing. Shout out to Hamdog69. 2069? I can't remember who won it last year. We had him on the podcast. You guys are awesome. And so many other great people put in videos, and might try to get some of those competitors from last year. I don't know if competitor is the right word. Participants. So get stoked for King of the Heel 2021. Free Heel Life is going to have a team edit. So we are all in for King of the Heel. We're coming for you, people. So get ready. That booklet's going to be dropping, I think, Jan 1. And like I said, we'll have CJ on to give us some more info. Also, this week, it's Christmas. We will be open Christmas Eve until 4 p.m. for any of you last-minute shoppers that need to pick stuff up locally in Salt Lake City. Or if you're in town skiing and something breaks, we'll have someone there to kind of help fix stuff. We will, however, be closed on Christmas Day. It's always really important to us to let our team spend some time with their family or have the day off to enjoy. So just know we're not going to be open on Christmas Day, but we'll be open the day after Christmas, ready to rock and roll, and hopefully mount all your new skis and shiny new things that you got for Christmas. So today, he grew up in Winter Park, Colorado, where he learned to Nordic ski at a very young age. His mom collected water samples for the US Geological Survey, and they would cover many of those miles by skiing. As he grew older, his school schedule allowed some more gravity-fed activities. He started alpine racing, bumps, and Nordic combined. He eventually picked up telemark and backcountry skiing in Crested Butte, and was around some of the very first alpine U.S. extreme skiing competitions that were held in that area. He also participated in the first X Games held in Crested Butte in the skier cross event on his telemark gear. Shortly after that, he organized the first ever telemark big mountain competition at A-basin in Colorado in the mid-1990s. He, along with Shane McKonkey and Justin Patnode, drafted up the rules for the telemark big mountain events based off the IFSA rules that were being used at the time. He continued putting on the big mountain events through the mid-2000s, in addition to adding other events like slopestyle, big air, and Telecross. He produced such telemark movies as Laying It Down, Bliss, and the Total Telemark Series. His movie tours crisscrossed the country and mixed in events, athlete promotion, and demos to help raise awareness of telemark skiing to the masses. Please welcome today's guest, Nat Ross. All right, Nat, welcome to the Free Heel Life podcast. How are you, brother?
Doing great, Josh. Been a while since we've connected.
I don't even remember the last time we saw each other. When was the last time you kind of did stuff with telemark skiing? Was it like mid 2000s maybe?
Yeah, probably maybe even like 2006, 2007 was kind of the tapering into things probably. Yeah.
Wow. That is a long time ago. That's awesome. Yeah. You actually, funny enough, you came up in a conversation with this guy that I had no idea even crisscrossed paths with you, which was Ken Emmerich. Do you remember him?
Briefly, yeah. So a lot of these pieces I need a lot of refreshment on with what know how it works.
Oh yeah, no, totally. No, it was funny because he was like a race guy from like the early 80s in Breckenridge, and he worked at like the ski school or something, and or maybe at Loveland. There was some early thing, and he brought your name up, and I was like, wow, of all the people I've talked to on this thing, that is not the one I thought you guys would have crossed paths with each other, because he was kind of like part of that late 1970s telemark crew in Summit County. But
yeah, I started like the gate chasing a little bit, then way into bumps, and then the Red Hot Telly Peppers kind of morphed off of that. So they've got some history.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, so just kind of going back to the beginning, where did you grow up in Colorado?
Yeah, Colorado native. Grew up freeheeling on cross-country sticks. So kind of started skiing when I was 3. Parents cross-country skied, Nordic skied every day. My mom worked for the US Geological Survey, so she collected water samples from the Moffett Tunnel, which is backside of Winter Park. Winter Park ski area is actually kind of the city park for Denver, believe it or not. So Nordic skied every day in the winter to go collect water samples, and then Colorado River kind of collection in flatlands. So made a lot of Nordic fitness that way, and then wanted to start getting some gravity in. When you're a kid, you get kind of bored of the flat stuff quick.
Yeah. So did you grow up in Winter Park then, kind of in that area, or?
I did, yeah, and it was actually really small area back then. Definitely not even a tenth the size of what Summit County was doing. So really off the grid in terms of the ski world. More famous for kind of hunting and fishing than it was for skiing back then.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think about all those areas. Like even in the last 20 years, it's like amazing how much it's grown. So I can't imagine like what it must have been like as a kid cruising around there. That would have been pretty rad. So where?
Daphne
go
came
ahead.
from it too. They were up on Berthoud Pass when they were starting doing their filming.
Oh, really? No way. Huh.
Yeah.
Did so like when you were kind of getting, like you said, you kind of started getting bored as a kid. Were you skiing at Winter Park and Mary Jane, or like like you were? Did you take the Nordic stuff to the hill right away, or were you an alpine skier or snowboarder at one point?
Yeah, luckily we got to do it all. So that area, Grand County, is really deprived in terms of resources. So financially, school district couldn't even afford to be open 5 days a week. So we had a 4-day school week, and Winter Park would send buses to the school with lunches and instructors, and you would basically just pick whatever you wanted to do that day, whether it's ski bumps, chase gates, Nordic combine, cross country, or back then just kind of get instruction. So that's what it started out as, and kind of Winter Park Competition Center kind of grew bigger and bigger, and my loves were bumps, alpine racing, Nordic racing, Nordic combined, and all the above, everything that they offered. It's kind of pre-snowboarding era back then.
Wow, that's cool. Well, I guess that's a like 4 days of school is like not too bad a thing, I guess, when you're I'm sure the parents were like, I don't know about this 4-day work or 4-day school week, but I guess if you got to ski out of it, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was the best part about it, is the cultural piece that all the attendees got. But believe it or not, like not even half of the school participated in the winter program. So
really,
we had really good attention, one-on-one attention, or small group attention. So real tight-knit community growing up there, and the ski crowd for sure.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. So, I mean, having all that background, doing the alpine stuff, and then was it Telemark that came into play when you were still in the Winter Park zone, like after high school or college, or what was your introduction to actual Telemark stuff?
Yeah, so really, I still was Nordic as much as possible. So I skied Division I through college, started at CU, ended up at Western State University. And at that point in Western and Gunnison was kind of the beginning of the Telemark days for me, where it was specifically got to get the gear that's a little bit heavier duty to be able to go to Crested Butte and not tear bindings off the skis every single turn. So that was kind of when I really started calling it Telemark, because a lot of the folks in Crested Butte were calling it Telemark, and the gear literally had to be T-bolted back in, and I had to find like the right resources there, because the equipment I was on in the past just wasn't heavy duty enough.
Yeah. So was like, just for time frame, is that like late 80s, early 90s that you were at Western?
Yeah. Early 90s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back when they had free. Do you remember Crested Butte, how they had like free ski days at the beginning of the year? Do you remember that?
Yeah, so they would do the Freeski, and this is like even kind of in the beginning of Freeski, where they really had, if you were a college student, you could kind of get some discounted passes, but they were trying to figure out how to get people to the mountain to kind of keep up with some of the other ski areas back then. And it was successful.
Oh yeah. No, for sure. I remember because I was probably like 1990, probably 95 or 96. I read an article in like I don't even know, some ski magazine that was like, Crested Butte has free skiing, and I'm like a high school kid, and we were like, we should go check this out. And so we literally drove out and slept in our cars, and I'll never forget, you just walked up and they just handed us a lift ticket, and we were like, no way. All right. So that was a cool time. But
yeah, they were with that because especially during the spring and that type, like very successful with that program, the wicket and the ticket, and you were up on the lifts, and a genius move back then.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, that makes a lot more sense. So you get there in the early 90s. Was that kind of like, were there, I guess, what was the Telemark, if you're coming from Nordic and you're in Crested Butte in the early 90s, like, was the Telemark, I guess, scene, like, was it pretty happening still then? Or like, what, kind of paint a picture for us, like, what was it like in Crested Butte at that point?
Yeah, so there was a real strong touring crowd back then that went pretty deep into the woods and very aggressive skiing. So there was the hut crowd that would go do that type of approaches, and then there were the single day hardcore lungs that would go just kind of bag peaks and make lines on all the crazy stuff. So from what I could tell back then, the Telemark skiers, the approaches just looked a little bit better. And I never really got invited in on some of those initial skis for the first couple of years because it was just a real small group, and they were very savvy with kind of snow protocol and where they skied and how they skied. So I just kind of could see where they were skiing, and it was very intriguing to me for sure.
Yeah, I've talked to some of the Crested Butte people from like the 80s, but yeah, I guess I don't know if we really dug into the 90s there, which is, yeah, I was always kind of curious where that was at that point. I mean, was the Butte kind of where you first saw kind of those early Freeski comps too? Because I mean, that would have been happening kind of in that, like, what, 93-ish, 95?
Yeah, so I was growing up, I grew up with Seth Morrison. So when we were at Western, we found a way to kind of get supported to enter the extreme comps. And Seth back in the day put the W on his helmet and had the college. We got the college to pay for us to go enter in the competition. So a gal named Gina was putting on the events for CBMR with Jeff Moffitt and his whole crew. And they had the qualifiers, everything back then. So kind of like 92, 93 was a little bit of my first introduction to what back then was called extreme, and Crested Butte kind of had the venue for it. So as you would get more snow throughout the season, they would kind of open up different venues that would, towards the end of the year, hopefully be where the extremes were going to be.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, the first time I think I saw that, I don't know if it was ESPN, but there was like the Crested Butte, it was like the US Extremes, I think, or whatever they were calling it, but they actually televised it. And I remember watching that when I was, I would have been in like early high school, but I remember that was the first time we ever saw anything like that. We were like, this is crazy. These guys are like, I mean, because, yeah, you think perspective. I mean, the skis were still straight and long, and much different style of skiing back then for sure. But
very different. And extremely, to put in, like you said, put it in perspective, just the pitches and the terrain and all of it in general. So like Seth was on his 207s and just making GS turns, and back then kind of big straight airs, way before kind of the backflips and all that stuff. It was just cross the tips and do some grabs. And Paul O'Connor and a couple of those folks were kind of early into that scene where Powder Magazine, John Sandy Productions was the one putting it on. There was a local TV station too that would play it every day throughout the winter as well. Same thing when the X Games rolled into town, which I got to be a part of for mountain bike and skiing. And then I actually did the ski qualifiers on Telemark skis.
No way. In the X Games?
Yeah, so the very first winter X Games, first 2 years were in Crested Butte.
Right, when they had the slopestyle was like ski blades, right? Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was more of it was more like a 4-cross back then, or a 6-cross.
Oh, okay. So wait, so
Yeah.
so you competed in X Games in a skier cross style event then?
Yeah, so they had skier cross, and it was by qualifying round. So I got eliminated pretty early being on telemark skis, but some of the folks in the heats that I was in the early heats made it towards the finals and to the finals. Like Tyler Williams, he's one that was real fortunate one year, and then the next year kind of blew out his knee in the X Games. And then I also did the snow bike. They had 1 year they had a snow mountain bike. So you were kind of on the far side of the hill underneath the banana loop, and it was same principle. First one down the hill, really difficult, kind of a dual slalom on snow course as well.
Oh, geez. I remember that because that was back when they had the Norba races had like dual slalom, right? Like when Sean Palmer was doing that stuff. Is that kind of that era?
You got it, Josh, because Palmer came to the X Games, and that was kind of the first time I had seen him in action with really what he, his character and what he does for the sport in general, or his personality, shall we say, and how it kind of changed the sport. So I remember going to I was wearing a lot of Lycra back then, and we all were with like GS suits and Nordic suits and all that. And I remember going to grab my moto gear back home for one of the practice sessions, because I had noticed that Sean Palmer showed up and just had a different perspective on the entire thing, like took it levels beyond. And he did multiple disciplines too back then.
Yeah, I mean, and for those people out there that don't know who Sean Palmer is, look him up on YouTube. Like early snowboarder, kind of just radical. I don't know. Do you remember that snowboard he had? It had like the big clown on it. I don't remember if it was like a Libtech or I just remember the graphics from his boards as a kid. I was always like, oh, this guy is crazy, But
he was very blingy as well. So like off the hill, like all of his gear was certainly dialed and really paid attention to the race runs and the qualifying, and very into the performance side of it, but just push the sport. Yeah, but his stuff was flashy, no doubt.
Yeah, I just realized there was Sean Farmer too. I might be mixing it. Sorry, you snowboarders out there, if I'm I'm screwing up my graphic history here. Well, that's cool, man. That's rad. So, I mean, in the early Crested Butte extremes, like, were there other telemark skiers? Like, I seem to remember. Do you remember Scott Murray back then?
Yeah, so Scott Murray probably came into the scene, was one of the first telemarker on the male side that was not local that came in. Adam Comey would be kind of one of the MSP kind of pioneers to say, hey guys, if you want to compete at the extremes, telemarkers, it's a little different level. Like, we'll take your money, you guys can enter, but the venues are tough and the judges aren't going to give you any points for your turn. So I do recall that Scott was one of the ones that came in early. Kasha Rigby and Heather Paul were kind of two of the first gals that had success at the extremes against like Jill Sickles Matlock, the world champion. So a lot of the gals, or at least two of them in particular, HP and Kasha, were really competitive. Leslie Ross as well out of Breckenridge, very competitive against in the big mountain crowd or the extreme crowd. But for the guys, Scott was one of the first to come into it. And there were many that did, but to get into the qualifying rounds or progress through the days, it was some stiff competition back then.
Yeah, and this is like pre IFSA stuff. I mean, that was pretty much it, right? Like, were there, at least in my recollection or what I've studied, like, I don't remember, like, there wasn't really other regional events, were there? I mean, was that kind of like the proving ground back then in the early mid 90s?
Yeah, and that's all there was. So it was definitely, you could tell that telemarkers didn't belong there, at least not yet, especially with the way the equipment couldn't hold up to the punishment that some of those athletes were pushing it. So I think kind of in 98 is when that spawned me to put on what was kind of the inaugural US Telemark Free Skiing Championships, was to kind of have a platform for telemark skiers or backcountry or whatever access you want to call it. But so that you could somebody like Scott or a lot of the folks that were higher level could certainly go compete in the Freeski or in the extreme comps, but it was at least a level playing field for telemarkers because it was just kind of IFSA back then. Justin Patnode helped me kind of draw up a lot of the rules from IFSA, and same with Shane McKonkey back then. The three of us kind of sat down and figured out what rules would carry over for telemark. Folks like Adam and a couple others didn't want too much to do with it because they liked to telemark on their own, but they thought that telemark was a little bit of a different discipline.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And it's funny because I remember talking to Adam Comey way later on when he was running some stuff here in Salt Lake. And yeah, that's funny to hear you talk about him because I remember sitting down and it was kind of the same vibe. He's like, we've tried this before, and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm probably a little late to the conversation on this one, but that's funny. What before because I do want to get into you putting comps on. I'm curious, like back then, do you remember what your thoughts were in terms of it being a separate discipline? Like, did you think that was important? Because I'm kind of curious, like to spawn off on your own, like just to do telemark. Did it seem important, or did it seem more important at the time to like beat out the alpine guys?
Yeah, like Josh, it's so hard because with the passion that, and all skiers have the same thing, it's the turn, right? But when it comes down to being judged or compared, I did feel that there was going to need to be some sort of a movement. And I was a little bit off back then with kind of how much of a movement it was going to be. Because like in the early days of telemark, when it was starting to grow, everyone could feel it. And I thought, this is just going to take off. It's going to be a kind of a really larger than life discipline in itself. I was wrong, but back then I kind of felt that way. So that was kind of one of the pieces that led me on the trajectory of giving telemarketers kind of their own platform for the big stuff, the exciting stuff, or just to showcase more than just the turn alone, and definitely off piste where it wasn't at the ski area, it wasn't underneath the chairlift, just a place that the turn could be raw and it could kind of showcase what the athletes were doing.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'm glad to actually hear that from you because I've always been of that same kind of mindset, but I wasn't putting on events like at the beginning like you were. And so I was always curious kind of like how you guys felt about that. Cause I feel like that's always kind of been a persistent idea that, yeah, maybe the trajectory wasn't as large as maybe it was perceived to be, but, yeah, I always liked the idea of telemarkers versus telemarkers. I always thought that was super valuable. Well, I'm curious. Okay, so the first one, it was the first one at A-basin that you put on?
It was actually kind of a 2-venue. It was basically 2 different spots on the west wall, so kind of a qualifier and then finals. And luckily there was enough snow to do it at the west wall, and it was gnarly that year. Kind of put it on in the early spring, so there was quite a bit of momentum and a lot of folks were excited about it. Backcountry magazine, David Harrower at the time, and Betsy, his wife, before Adam had taken it over, they were really into kind of helping spread the word on that front. So it was pretty easy to get a lot of folks that were skiing bumps to come watch it, or at least enter it. Kind of did a gender equitable purse back then too, and kind of made it more about the participation from all sides, and whoever made it to the finals or whoever qualified, for sure it was a big deal, but it was kind of more just to get folks out there entering. So I remember being in ski area parking lots, going around when Tom Winter was passing out frees, inviting folks that you saw on telemark skis or were reading the magazine to come be part of this competition. So I would say, I think it was like 60, under 70 competitors the first year, but not bad trajectory to start the first inaugural event with.
No, not at all. Yeah. We just actually do you remember Brian Mail at all from back then?
Yeah.
I just had him on the podcast and we were kind of digging into that because we were joking around about the pre-internet days of like finding out about that. And I'm like, how did you even find out? He's like, I don't know. It was like, there was like a flyer, or something. And I'm like, oh man, that's so crazy to think about, So you put that one on, and then was it within the first couple of years that you put the Berthoud Pass one on as well?
Yeah, so Berthoud was always one of those venues that looked really promising, but I needed a little bit more kind of financial support to pull that one off because it was way more backcountry-esque. And also, and predominantly, I'm talking like the insurance requirements and some of those pieces. So one of my longtime sponsors, Red Bull, was involved with the first event, and they were highly involved with the second one. So the Berthoud Pass would from what I can recall, Josh, and that was so long ago, I think that Berthoud was my second comp in that sequence because I think I did it earlier in the winter the following season. But like you said, without some of the internet stuff, it's kind of my memory's a little foggy.
I did a timeline of your stuff at one point, and I forgot to look at it. I remember, I think I can't remember if I talked to you, but I remember talking to Leslie and asking her and digging up like old finish results and stuff. But yeah, and for those that don't know Berthoud Pass, it's a defunct ski area. I think it was already defunct by the time you were putting events on then, right?
It was. In fact, even the towers were gone, so nothing left.
That's crazy. Well, and so, yeah, you're talking like, I guess, late 90s at this point. And I guess, do you recall like how you were, people were starting to come from different areas like Utah and Colorado. And what was that like? You probably didn't know everybody that started showing up to these things. Were you surprised at the level of skiing, or was it sort of like, oh no, like we're all better here in Colorado? Or, do you remember what it looked like from the ski perspective?
Yeah, Josh, it was great because for sure there were the pods and the circles that the telemark community, and then even just kind of the local Colorado telemark competitions that were feeders. But the best part was watching folks come from California, and I didn't see too many East Coast folks coming in. That was always a bummer to not have folks from all over the place. But I remember the Utah contingency was insane. The California crew blew my mind. And that was the best part, was to hear rumors about these folks or meet them when they would come through, or you'd get a phone call back then, and maybe even someone just writing you saying, what's the competition? What are the rules like? It was great. People doing their research and then coming out to the venue and blowing your mind with the different styles of skiing and the ability, just folks, the Utah crew, the California posses.
Yeah. Well, and so that must have been around that same time that you started making movies. Is that when Tough Guy production started, was like the late 90s? Because and correct me if I'm wrong, Lay It Down or something, is that the name of the first one?
Yep, Laying It Down.
Laying It Down, and then Bliss was the second one, correct?
Correct. And I'm glad you're bringing up this, because I just went to kind of go look at the movie archive to get a view of when that stuff is. And the first one was, first two were VHS copies. So that kind of puts it into perspective.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny. Someone actually hit me up about Laying It Down the other day, and I was like, man, I don't even know if I even ever owned a copy of that one. And, yeah. So, and then Bliss, I remember that had BJ Brewer on the cover, and
Molly was a big part of that one too. And that was part of a lot of filming from Bliss was in the Wasatch.
Yep.
Probably 60% of it, just kind of the crew that were skinning up, and then just the depth of talent out of Utah.
Yeah. BJ Brewer was definitely one of my heroes when I first kind of came around your guys' stuff, watching those. His style was like, still to this day, it's just I can see it in my head, just that swoopy arm drag, just super surfy style. And Molly Dumas, she was an amazing skier too. But those early movies, man, like what pumps me up, even when I think back to that, is, you know, young kids now are like, yeah, I'm going to be like the first to do stuff on telemark skis. And I always think about Bliss because I'm pretty sure he was doing double backflips in that movie and people didn't realize that. I mean, that's a long time ago. That's over 20 years ago, you know?
Yeah, and you remember, Josh, we were also kind of doing the movie premieres simultaneously and then going out and filming for the next year. So a lot of times there were, on the big jumps, there was kind of sometimes only one camera angle that would look good or put it into perspective. So even if there were two cameras out there or three, some of the big footage was a single angle. So for sure, BJ, and kind of like initially several double backflips by him. And then that same year, Ross Richards.
Oh, yeah. Ross Richards, man.
Yeah.
Classic.
So both of those guys were, from what I can recall, two of the first ones doing the doubles that were, we didn't call it stomping them by any means, but at least kind of landing them or making it look like they could ski out of it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, so some of those early videos, I mean, you're really picking up a lot of early, I mean, not really that's kind of that mix of like where, like what we maybe would call free skiing now. I mean, it was like coming out of the straight ski era, and then now you've got a little bit fatter skis, I guess, but not super fat. I don't know. And guys are doing tricks and stuff. I mean, what was it like filming guys at that time? Because I mean, you know, now we're 20 years down the road, it seems pretty normal. Kids go to like Woodward and learn how to do like quadruple, you know, whatever, you know, crazy double access spins and stuff. But back then, I mean, literally there was no practice area. Like everyone's just kind of doing it for the first time. I mean, I guess that's my perception of it. Did it feel like that when you were filming? Like, oh my gosh, like I'm watching stuff happen for the first time, you know?
Well, I think like if you were to talk to Bones and some of the crew that were out there, and you were out there skiing at the same time, so you remember some of the folks that you heard were doing the tricks, and you heard that they were doing them on telemark skis, but you really wouldn't see too many tricks in the competitions. There wasn't much stuff in the magazines and print. So it was almost like a rumor mill for like 5 or 6 years of the freestyle-ish type skiing that was going on in the backcountry, or even just the jumps. And really, I found it a lot more fun and intriguing to kind of do that type of, let's say, documenting with the movies, at least with in the spring, trying to find 4 or 5 different venues that you could have 4 jumps, 3 jumps, something that the athletes could progress on. And then you'd put 3 or 4 of them together. And that's when like Max Mancini kind of came into the scene with like Lorenzo and Ben Dolance. And you start getting 4 or 5 progressive guys together. And that was the best thing to watch these guys just push the sport.
Yeah, because that's when you, like after Bliss, then we kind of got into like Total Telemark Series. Is that right? Am I remembering?
Yeah, because then at that point in time, I kind of figured out the Total Telemark Tour was a combination of competitions, trade shows for the athletes at least, or at least for places like Outdoor Retailer or Snow Sports Industry of America, SIA, to showcase telemark skiing. And not just with the magazines, but kind of have like a hub or a yurt or a place that we could all kind of get together. So you remember that was kind of the early community where at least we could go around and get a calendar going. So at that point, that's kind of what was the Total Telemark Tour turned into, at least a piece where if you wanted to compete, you could. If you were into the filming piece, then that was there at a couple different places, like Brighton. The one year at the trade show, we did like that night comp and filmed it. But again, a lot of the night stuff never really made it into the movies.
Do you still have that footage somewhere?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I've got, who knows if it's melted or
on a hard drive that you can't plug in anymore.
Well, that's the thing. The other day, somebody wanted to pull up something that I grabbed, even a LaCie drive that normally you can kind of power up. And I'm like, good luck trying to find a cord for this thing.
Oh yeah, I know. I think about that a lot too. It's like it gets locked in with no cord to be found. That's crazy. Yeah, I remember that Total Telemark era was cool because, yeah, you really had a unique approach to, like, I remember you had the van or what, you had the vehicle that was like wrapped and it had the Total Telemark logo, and then yeah, it was like we knew that Tough Guy was putting not only the movies out, but we knew you had like the extreme comps, and then you started actually doing the slopestyle comps too, kind of mid 2000s, I think, early to mid like 2004 or 5, somewhere in there.
Kind of like 2002, 2003 were the idea years, and then 2004 was when Andy Held came on board, or actually
right.
2003. And then with Andy, he had the wherewithal and the resources to kind of organize and keep things under control. Because at that point, I was more or less kind of just into the ideas. I was racing bikes professionally and pretty distracted, but loved the whole momentum of it. And Andy was the one that kind of put it back all into track and kept things organized and kept the series going, kept all of it in flow and in check. And also the sponsors, because back then I thought it was fairly important to involve even companies like Karhu and all the ski brands simultaneously, as opposed to just working with one. So me as an individual, it was pretty hard to juggle that component. And Andy was key in orchestrating, working with all the brands, keeping them all at a professional level and allowing them to go to ski area, working with the reps out of each different place or zone territory, and the parent companies as well. So Andy had a good vision there to kind of keep it on the educational side of things approachable for folks that wanted to learn how to telemark ski. So that's kind of when, even like, because Andy came from the instruction side of things, being a ski instructor at Copper Mountain in his beginning years, kind of that's where he met Ben Dolence when Ben was a patroller there.
That makes a lot more sense, because then that was the one event I really remember was Copper Mountain, because there was a big air, there was a slope style, there was like skier cross. I mean, it's crazy to think back, because like I try to explain that to people. I'm like, no, there was like a lot of events, and like there was a lot of people that went to these things, and it was kind of like this meeting place, you'd see like Ty Dayberry, and he was like the California guy, and they'd show up and you'd see all these tricks, and you're like, whoa, this is crazy. I didn't even know that was happening. So yeah, it really was important as a meeting point too, I think.
It was. And I remember, like, when you would come out, Josh, you would have your fleet of skis, but you would show up and you'd be able to check out the venues, and some folks skied some of the contests blind, but I remember you would always put your time in and do some scouting and at least be prepared for whatever the course was, because we would build the courses, but there wasn't a lot of practice time, because with the telemark crowd and whatnot, everybody always wanted to poach it, or why can't we have this competition? Like, why are those guys, why do they get that just for telemark? There was always the having to juggle and jockey and position ourselves, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting to look back on that. I mean, when you look at, what was the hardest part, like putting all those events together? I mean, obviously you said like, then you started racing bikes. I mean, that's like full-time endeavor with training and I'm sure all that. But I mean, was it really hard to put those events on even back then? Because sometimes I try to, we ended up trying to run a big mountain comp for a few years at Targhee, and I think people's perception of running events, it's complicated, right? And I'm curious, like in the early days, like was it any easier, or was it just as hard back then as it is now?
It was always a challenge, and I did save one piece of history that always makes me laugh. Is the insurance piece is always key, and I have from 1998 or 1999, a $1 million policy for event that cost $300. And now you're in the 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 for if you're working with ski areas or larger venues, or if you've got a place with a lot of gravity. So it was certainly easier to pull the permits back then, especially in Colorado. There were probably like 9 folks or different agencies that you would work with. So the BLM was always tricky to work with for filming. Forest Service, not so easy. But ski areas, that was kind of what I found is the sweet spot and the magic zone to be able to work with the event crew because somebody somewhere telemark skied and was willing to help out or share with the resources or pitch in. And then the telemark crew, different than everybody else, like even if you were competing, you still set up the tents, tore down the banners, did the flagging. Like everyone was out there putting their piece in. So can't speak to any other community out there that's ever been the same way in the early years of telemark. Because it was a lot of work on my part, but also folks that were competing or coming in from other places, they helped out too. So rewarding.
Yeah, no, I think that sense of community is still a huge part of why this thing's still chugging away. So
you're keeping it. And I remember you were given back in the day because there was we had a movie premiere that you had some speakers and they didn't fit it in the van and you were driving your vehicle and it was just this big production, missing dinner, all that stuff with the competition or something the next day. But you used to do it and you still do it.
Yeah, no, I'm trying. That's funny. I don't even remember that. No, it's funny because like I came in just a little after some of those other guys that you knew, like Charlie Cannon and Sarah Clemenson. And I remember I was sleeping I think I rented a room from Charlie at one point, but I just remember being like, oh, these are the tough guy people, you know? And I remember tell me if you remember this. Cause one thing was, as I remember in the early days, I was like, well, how do you get in the movies? And it was like, all that these guys would tell me is like, all you need is a 3-chip camera. Do you remember this?
Yeah. So kind of the premise back then was I wanted to showcase all sorts of different zones. And I felt like I was gravitating to Utah quite a bit or California and always sticking around in Colorado. So I would help people get discounted, basically like a VX 2000 or the 900 or the 1000 were kind of staples back then, or kind of pre-Canon, and then Canon came out with the XL1. But I was very adamant about helping folks if they wanted to have a segment, or I remember like this kid Ray, his parents wanted him to have a segment. And it was like, well, we can rent cameras. These are the places that when we're not using our cameras, you can rent them. Here's how many batteries you need. Here's, mandatory tripod shots. So I had like this shot list and things available for folks and gear, equipment, arsenal. But that was the thing is, hey, how do we spread the word? And I can't do it all by myself. And especially like I was over in Europe a lot of starting in the spring and for the early World Cups and stuff. And that was when the filming was good. So I literally for the good sections, a lot of the movies, I wasn't even on site, just sending out cameras. But you're right. It was whoever had a camera or multiple cameras. If you guys could sync up and go out together, then you could probably get a segment. And way different than like what Powder Whores were doing. They were scripted. They knew what they wanted. They had things planned out. And I was definitely flying by. I hope we're getting people out there and shooting enough this year to even make a movie.
Yeah. Well, but what's funny is that a lot of people don't know the little history tidbit about the Powder Whores. Is Powder Whore was, if I remember correctly, Powder Whore was actually a segment in a Tough Guy movie, and then they spawned out of you, right? Do you remember?
Yeah, and thank God they did, because they shined, and when we were kind of originally putting into the film their segment, which back then I would always have more than 10 segments in the movie, and everything from the punk rock to just the beautiful turns and the dichotomy of what the sport was. I didn't want to have it be my vision only. I wanted to have it touch others. And especially when the networks would show it, like there was a Resort Sports Network, found it a lot easier if you had a diverse group out there. But Powder Whores, their first segment, when they were submitting their films and editing it, they were next level, like way better editors than I was. had better music at their disposal, even for just this was like movie 4 for me, probably. And it was their first segment, and it was very telling where they were going, because Noah and like both of them, they were professional about it, where I was probably quite a bit too distracted at that point.
Yeah. Well, it's funny as you're talking, I'm remembering all these names, and that's what was cool about your movies, because you guys were, Tough Guy kind of had this, cool mixed vibe. You had like the Luke Miller, was like kind of more punk rock, and you had Steve, what's Steve's last name? He lives in Australia now. Blanking on that. Anyway.
Me too.
Huh?
Right.
Who?
I'm blanking on all this too.
Oh man, I'm blown. Sorry, Steve Crazy, man. I don't know why I blanked on his last name, but like, I mean, it's so crazy to think back to a lot of that stuff. And you had Pete Gallup, and Pete's doing a lot of the Ray Singer, dude. That's who you were talking about, I think, with the parents.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that early Carhu stuff. Man, what a cool time, because that was, you really did have these cool figures that really were influential. Like, for guys like me, even I'm watching like, like Mark Teason, Aaron Turnipseed, like you had this whole like Summit County crew, Eben Mond, I mean, I could go on and on. I get pumped. I'm a total fanboy though. So
yeah, well, it was nice because the talent was there and the energy level. So you had like, definitely sleds helped. But just the whole movement in general, having the extreme ski piece go on, turn into Freeski, and then you had all these telemarkers with style. And I think Tough Guy always had a soft spot for the train parks and all of that as well, just to say, hey folks, like telemarkers can do stuff too. And the big mountain piece, it's always great to have, but that was always one of the big challenges for sure, is how are you going to get to Japan for a segment this year? What's going to happen in Alaska? And for me, it was so much fun just to go to the ski areas and have the guys just do their stuff in the terrain parks.
Yeah, and I was gonna say just one piece on the big mountain stuff is, did you end up teaming up with Jeff Wright for the USTSA stuff, or was yours separate back then? I just was for my own personal memory.
Yeah, when Jeff and USTSA wanted to put on some events, we put on, I think, 2 years of events together, and kind of pooled them. Jeff wanted to grow. I think the gate chase thing was shrinking, and a lot of their competitors were in the competitions as well, like the free ski stuff. So Jeff wanted to chime in and help with the marketing and promotion. I think that's kind of one of the reasons we got to Alpine Meadows. So Jeff brought more venues to it, and also a diverse crowd a little bit more so, instead of just the folks on the cutting edge. It was more traditional locals that he tapped into in some of those pieces, even in Utah.
Yeah, because we've hit on that a little bit at certain points. Just kind of that early free ski. I think there was like 5 stops at one point, which was pretty crazy. But
those stops were like, that took a person's kind of off-season planning and then commitment to do the series. Right? It was, if you had 5 stops on the tour and you tried to remain in one piece throughout the season, it was a pretty big endeavor.
Yeah, no, it's funny you brought that insurance piece up, because I remember coming across an old YouTube video someone put up, and they were joking about how much they spent on the insurance. I was like, or it was like the total budget for the tour was like $1,500 or something, and I'm like, how did you pay everybody to even like show up and help? But it's probably all that volunteer, stuff that was going on. That's cool, man. Well, and then you eventually ended up, Stefan had started working for you, and you kind of handed it off at somewhere in that kind of that 07, 08 probably. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think maybe 08. We would have to ask Stefan what the exact year was. So he had tons of energy, where I was definitely way too much time in other sports. And he still was always out filming. And that was kind of the key piece there. Is the competitions started to subside a little bit. And I think Stefan still, his passion was with the camera and skiing with the guys and gals out there all the time. And I mean, he was still skiing hundreds of days a year, where my days were starting to wind down. So he definitely put some more resurrection back into it when it was starting to slow down quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, and what did you end up? So after that, like, where did you end up? Like, what did you end up doing after kind of post Telemark? When you were really pushing that.
Yeah. So I honestly started kind of locking the heel down some and touring more, and kind of more experiential type skiing as opposed to skiing with my friends and the groups. And I was in all those sweet spots, traveling, filming all the time, but I wasn't really skiing what I wanted to ski. I'd always find myself like looking out to the side or wondering what's over in that ridge or that valley. So those were those pieces that I decided to check off and just kind of make some of my own turns and do that more on a ski vacation or a ski trip, as opposed to trying to go out with all the crew and slay a bunch of stuff. So I kind of found a little sanctuary in those spots that I was visiting, but trying to explore them on my own.
Yeah, I hear you. That's people that sit around filming and shooting photos. If you've never done it, you're not skiing a whole lot.
Threw out the radios, Josh. That was the first thing I did. It was like all the radios, all the chargers, all this stuff. I just sold them to somebody, and they're like, "Why are you selling all these? I can't believe you're getting rid of all of them." I'm like, "I don't want to communicate in this format anymore. I don't want to talk about the turn. I don't want to direct the turn. I just want to go make the turn." Yeah,
no, I hear you. There's a lot to be said for that. It's like people are like, "Have you ever gone skiing in Alaska?" And I'm like, I have been to Alaska twice. And I can't say I've skied a whole lot there, but I've stood in the snow and hiked around a lot. So
yeah, spent a lot of time, and it was worth it. But there's certainly some other things to go back and check out, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and I know, with your bike career, like you kind of got done. Like, did you race that whole time? You were cross country, right?
Yeah, so kind of in the very, very beginning, we were doing a lot of the disciplines. Same with skiing, you were doing them on the one quiver bike, which was a hardtail. So I was racing for Gary Fisher at the time on the factory team, and just kept on getting more and more successful as the disciplines started fading and specialty kind of started taking off. So I found myself like in a quandary of what do I do? Do I kind of just give up skiing completely, and what direction do I head? So what worked for me was kind of putting skiing aside and just doing it for fun or even a little bit of training, and then just focusing on the racing career. And Gary had to sit down with me and a talk saying, hey, you need to really commit to this program if you're going to be doing this. Like, we need you way more focused. Like, you got the talent, but you're putting in a little bit of time here and there. We need you giving it all. So that talk really hit home, resonated. And from that point on, I just focused on pretty much cross-country racing career, turned into an endurance career, got to milk that for quite a long time, about a 15-year stint, all in all. And then the main thing for me, just getting inducted in the Mountain Bike Hall of Fame, was the 29-inch wheel. I was the first person to race that globally, or in World Cups, or at the international level. And Gary was one of the original pioneers of the 29-inch wheel with Wes Willits, but Gary Fisher had more resources with Trek, and Keith Bontrager was the one making the wheels. So they had all these resources, all this engineering, all these teams, and I got to be the first athlete for many years racing that platform, the 29-inch wheel, which now that's the standard.
Wow. Congratulations. I had no idea you were inducted into the Hall of Fame. That's amazing, man.
Yeah, so that was kind of a good reason to go down that trajectory and just see what I could do, because I had a lot of people believing in me and a lot of support. But for me, just being outside is good enough. And I certainly love skiing as much as riding a bike. So it was really a tough one for me to bite the bullet and focus solely on mountain biking. And back then, the contracts didn't have it to where you couldn't do a lot of stuff. But towards the end of my career, they were in the contracts. You couldn't kayak. You shouldn't be mountain biking. So you had to really hone in and focus so that you weren't injured during your competition season.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure, man. I'm not a biker myself, but like watching it from the outside, like from the 90s to now, and just from the peripheral of the whole thing. I mean, you've seen it evolve dramatically. I'm sure. Like,
oh man, it's awesome. Yeah, because it's very similar to telemark skiing, where I once thought, oh, telemark is going to be, as big as alpine skiing and almost as big as snowboarding or something like that. But the mountain bike piece it only keeps just the expansion alone for cycling and mountain biking is just blows my mind.
What do you think, like, if you had to compare those two things? Because, biking, that's so funny, because everyone's like, you're not a mountain biker. I'm like, I don't want to buy a bike. It's too expensive now, But,
yeah.
But I mean, do you see like any parallels there? Like what has mountain biking done in terms of accessibility, that maybe like a telemark world could learn from? I mean, any insight on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the mountain biking piece, it was that same hardcore, had to be driven. It was kind of that exclusive club of next level. You had to have some sort of experience on a bike to be able to get onto a mountain bike. And then the mountain biking piece, the equipment sort of started. The manufacturers are paying attention to, okay, these kids' mountain bikes are too heavy. What do we need to do for a kid to have a good time? Well, let's make them lighter. Let's make them more nimble. Let's put more R&D into the bikes. So that sector in the industry put a lot of attention and energy into making the sport more accessible. IMBA, the International Mountain Bicycling Association, was pretty adamant in access at that point and stewardship. So they certainly, with that voice, got to grow the accessibility factor and make it just a little bit easier here and there to ride the mountain bike. So not too different between the sports, other than just the fact that the outdoor space, the outdoor industry is separate than the bike industry these days, because the bike industry is, I wouldn't say maybe more professional, but just a little bit more business history, especially coming from the European side, where they're very competitive with platforms and manufacturing and trying to make money at it, where at least the skiing and the Nordic and the telemark crowd's a little bit more relaxed, and they just want to enjoy their lives as opposed to make every cent count. That's how I would sum it up, but
no,
who
that's
knows?
super interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's like the age-old question. I mean, how do you grow it and how do you do that? And it's that's a cool insight. I hadn't thought to kind of crisscross those two, so I appreciate you kind of sharing your thoughts on it. That's awesome, man. Thanks for even digging into that stuff, man. I love, congratulations. That's amazing that you were able to do that with your mountain bike career. And thank you for all your contributions to telemark. I know it probably seems like eons ago, but that's why I'm having you on here. Like, thank you for like just digging into the history with me, man.
Yeah, I think you refreshed me a little bit there too, Josh, because it was quite a while ago, and there's a lot of folks that if I didn't mention their names, my bad. I know, especially with the crews and the circles with Tough Guy, there were a lot of folks that gave tons of energy, and it paid off for all of us back then. But yeah, certainly, what a good time to be involved with the sport of telemark. That wasn't the beginning for me, but there was a lot of momentum when we were out making turns.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. Well, awesome. I'm sure I'll hit you up again sometime, and if you find a new or a extra copy of laying it down, I'll find a VHS player and catch up on it.
Perfect. That soundtrack might put you to sleep. I don't know if there's enough hardcore stuff in it for you.
No, that's all good. I love that, man. All right, brother. Well, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Josh, man, thanks for the time. Good connecting.
You too, brother. Talk to you later.
Cheers.
Another great one. And Nat is one of those guys that I've definitely wanted to have on since I started the podcast. And another one of these great people who took a lot of time out of their lives to make a great contribution to pushing Telemark forward for whatever reason. You know, they had a vision and they wanted to see, you know, different styles emerge or give platforms to people to come out and compete against one another. And those early days, guys like that really, really helped me see the possibilities of what was not only what was possible from an athletic standpoint, but just they created a lot of culture around Telemark. And I think that's one of the things I value most about that early Tough Guys production stuff is it gave us an opportunity as young people to get together and, you know, try skiing hard against other people. And the movies were so cool. And it was kind of accessible once you, like you said, like the 3-chip camera, it cracks me up because I think about that. It's like pre-YouTube days. It's like, hey, if you get this camera, it's got the 3-chip technology, you can have your segment in the Telemark movie. And I love that DIY attitude and just meeting so many great people that were just getting after it because they believed in something. And I'm really grateful he took the time to spend, you know, just catching up with me and kind of letting me ask him some additional questions. And it helps me kind of put the pieces together sometimes. And I always appreciate that from a history perspective. So I hope you guys enjoyed that one too. He's an important person in my opinion. And I'm glad that he did so well in mountain biking as well. That's amazing. Like always, if you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can always make a donation of your choice at paypal.me/freeheellife. You can always shop with us at freeheellife.com. We would love to be your preferred Telemark shop, as I'm always saying. And if you're in Salt Lake, feel free to drop on by. You can get your Telemark gear. We've got a full service shop, mounts, remounts, ski tunes, all that good stuff. If you're ordering online, we're always happy to mount the bindings onto your skis prior to shipping. You can always do that. I've been kind of peppering the conversation a little bit on the podcast, not a lot of other places. We are going to have some certified Free Heel Life ski techs. We're beta testing in some areas, Upper Wisconsin, Angel Fire, New Mexico, and the Front Range of Colorado. Stay tuned for more details as we get that going. We should have some of that up and running here in January, and would love for you to get the same level of customer service and technical ability near you. So hopefully if that works, we can continue to try that in other places. So always good trying to grow and improve, and we can only do that because of you out there. So thank you so much. Telemarksgear.com. You can find all your gear reviews, news, and all that good stuff. And we are always looking for the latest to share with you there. Email me directly at podcast@freeheellife.com. And thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. Hope you had a good time. And until next week's brothers and sisters, my fellow protectors of the Telemark turn, spread Telemark always, my friends.